What's up, YouTube? Des the Mess back once again. Today we're jumping into the second episode exploring the lore, philosophy, spirituality, religion, if you will, of Insane Clown Posse's dark carnival theology, mysticism, however you want to call it. We're getting into it. My pronouns are she, her, and they, them, and I think that's about it for the intro. We're going to jump right in. So I did some listening to this album over the last 2 weeks and wrote a little bit of a video essay. So I'm just going to read off of that and add stuff here and there as it comes to mind. But I feel like this should suffice. So again, we're talking about their first album. This is their first album, period. Carnival of Carnage, okay? And that's the ground floor for what will become the rest of their career, as well as introducing the mythos of the Dark Carnival, the spirits, and all of the metaphors that have to do with the Dark Carnival. So this album is by far their most problematic, but it helped to define their sound and direction. Throughout the series, we'll see how they moved further away from the glaring misogyny this album held, although it takes a while, and it's still not gone. Although they still participate in it, lyrically. One of my major critiques of ICP is how much they, like so many other rap artists, continue to uphold misogynistic themes, either casually or obviously. It can be really hard to make the case against abusing your spouse, as they do in some ways on later albums, when songs on this album are advocating the opposite. However, we could dissect this as an evolution of them as people, Joe Bruce and Joey Utzler, and as characters, Violent J and Shaggy, respectively, or confront the idea that part of the violence of the ghetto, which is what this album is like really inferring as a metaphor, includes domestic abuse, making this early entry into the Dark Carnival lore some of the hardest to listen to in a modern context. That is not to say that its problems were more acceptable in the early 90s, but that more people now are aware of why this stuff was problematic. So the first track is the intro, right? The Carnival of Carnage is the first Joker's card. It represents the violence of the so-called ghetto, the rough areas of a city, the underdeveloped and ignored sections of urban America. It creeps into the suburbs and rural areas, into the upper crust sections of the city, to unleash the horrors onto the unsuspecting, rich, and privileged. The horrors of the Dark Carnival are rides and attractions, disguises for torture devices and methods of murder and destruction used to get back at people who, willingly or otherwise, participate in the oppression of the poor and neglected. This is judgment. Therefore, this is an aspect of God, aka the Dark Carnival. The Carnival of Carnage is merely the opening act used to lure in people who are evil and ignorant. In a way, it represents class struggle and revolution, although those aren't the words that ICP will use to describe this aspect of their lore. This track is followed by the eponymous track, Carnival of Carnage, which doesn't need any discussion since it's just a beat with Carnival of Carnage on repeat for about 2.5 minutes. So the third track, the Juggalo. This song is where the term Juggalo comes from. Violent J says that during an early performance of this song in a concert, an extra line came to his mind, and he said, "Juggla, Juggla, are you a Juggalo?" And the fans took to it. The word Juggalo doesn't end up in any of their lyrics officially on this album, however, which suggests that it was a product of inspiration on tour supporting this work. Violent J talks about some of his gang life in this song and sets a tone for the rest of their career for hating the racist aspects of the South. In a simple sort of way, J talks about how living in dangerous and impoverished conditions is bad for your mental health. The ghetto took my brain, and motherfuck, I want it back, he says. Now we're going to jump into First Day Out. In this song, Jay is talking about getting laid after being in jail for 6 months. While this story is an obvious exaggeration, it is probably inspired by the time he did serve for gang-related crimes. So it goes, his friends set him up with a girl. He supposedly smooth talks his way into getting her to pay for dinner and meets her parents. Specifically, he tells her dad that he sells crack and insinuates the mom is one of his clients. For this reason or some other, he ends up getting $50 from the guy and borrows the family car to bring the girl home to his place. It's his first day out, and he caught his nut. That song is beyond problematic for every reason I just said and then some. You'll notice throughout this talk and future episodes, I'm not going to quote a whole lot of their lines because I want to make the case that the language they used was problematic while still making, in some cases, progressive arguments. But I'm not going to take away from the fact that the way they get the message across is pretty terrible at times. Like the next song, Redneck Ho. This song is basically playing into the stereotype of people who live in the U.S. South all being racist and ignorant. We know that's not obviously true, but the story here is that redneck women are only good for sex. Again, according to Violent J and Shaggy 2 Dope. It opens up with two rednecks talking about a farmer's daughter. The same two characters appear at the end of the song to plan assaulting her. The whole time, the line, "fucking bigot," plays on opposite speakers, left and right, in between all the other lyrics. The third verse features John Kickjazz explicitly saying how he wants to kill racists and Klansmen. So, I mentioned this in the first video that I did about this, that John Kickjazz was a temporary member of ICP. After this, he kind of fades out. He appears on some singles and one or two of the tracks from the EPs that follow. But once you get to their second album, The Ringmaster, John Kickjazz isn't in it anymore. Something that's also not stated in my essay, but is in Violent J's book, is they talk about a friend of theirs who went by the name of Grease E, who appeared on, I think, 2 of their songs ever, as kind of a filler for when John Kickjazz ended up leaving the band. So pretty much after that, though, it was just Violent J and Shaggy with featured artists, rather than having a 3-piece. It just works better for their dynamic. Something I also didn't write here, but I think needs to be noted, especially in early ICP material, most of the delivery is done by Jay. I'm not going to say most of the writing, but you can kind of tell it was him orchestrating the whole thing. So Shaggy does a lot of the mixing and helps produce stuff. He is good on turntables. There's a lot of that going on in their music that Shaggy participates in, but it isn't until they start really picking up steam that Shaggy starts getting more featured verses. So a lot of their early stuff is just Violent J rapping, with Shaggy kind of throwing lines in like a hype man. It can be really awkward to listen to because you're thinking, like, where is the posse of Insane Clown Posse? And you realize it's only 2 guys, and only one of them is very present, especially in their early stuff. After a while, it ends up being like one and then the other, and then maybe splitting on a third verse. But early on, it's basically Violent J just doing his thing, and it comes off as Violent J featuring Shaggy 2 Dope rather than ICP. That's my opinion, but it's also based on the way their music was put out. So that's just the way that it is. Their next track, Wizard of the Hood, is a parody song of sorts about if Violent J took the place of Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. But in this case, the characters he meets along the way have modern problems. So Jay's walking down the yellow brick alleyway. He lets down the Scarecrow off his pole, and they meet the Tin Man, who wants to be oiled up with a 40 of Red Bull. The three of them approach a forest where they meet the lion, who's brazen instead of cowardly. I found that interesting. When he tries to rob the party, Jay convinces him to come back to Delray, again, which is outside of Detroit, with him to rob people there, including to catch all the rich ones coming out the ball game. This is shaping up like a weird Dungeons and Dragons party, right? They meet the wizard, and he plans to keep Jay and the others there, blocking them off from returning. They spray him with bullets and escape, stealing his car to drive back to Detroit. But that's when Jay wakes up, drunk at a party. It was all a dream. Not much of a message here. I think it's fun and interesting. It's definitely got the horrorcore and acid rap going on. It doesn't add much to the lore. It's just kind of a funny story that Jay tells, essentially. And in a meta sort of way, it's a funny story about Jay telling a funny story. It's just one of those. Next, we have Guts on the Ceiling. Violent J has apparently exploded, and pieces of him are all over Detroit. The entire song is about he and his friends are locating his remains to put him back together. This is probably the first time the concept is introduced that wicked clowns never die, which is a theme that carries throughout all of their work. This could be somewhat of a parallel with Christian beliefs that individuals attain eternal life through Christ. While we can examine this song as purely a horrorcore banger, it can also be interpreted from a lens of the socioeconomic pressure of living in the ghetto, causing people to, in this case literally, explode. Is That You? Kid Rock features on this song. He doesn't ever talk about or acknowledge it, and ICP have rejected him as he moved into some alt-right views. Interestingly, but not surprisingly, he uses the soft N-word to describe himself, the one with the A on the end. One thing that I've always respected about ICP is that because they're white, they've never used the N-word in any of their music. They recognized early on that it simply wasn't their word, even the soft version with the A. More points in the anti-racist category for sure. Kid Rock's super problematic. I'm never going to talk about him out of this context unless he comes up for some other reason in a different video that I'm doing. I'm not going to touch his music at all. I never really liked the stuff that I heard of his. I will say in the book Behind the Paint, Jay talks about how when he originally met Kid Rock, he was super cocky and was exaggerating the numbers that he was selling for records when he was an early act coming out of Detroit. And I think that's funny and also makes sense if you know enough about Kid Rock to know where he's at today. That, yeah, he would be a braggart and overconfident and trying to make himself bigger than he is to these two clowns that he ended up doing a song with. Again, there's not much lore on this song. It's kind of Violent J, Shaggy, and Kid Rock all talking about how they would, like, hit on people, essentially. It's whatever, you know? It's not really horrorcore. It's just a song that they did. Maybe early on they thought it would kind of help them each buffer each other's career a little bit. I don't know. I don't have the reason for that. It's a song on the album. I can't really stand it. I think some of the lines are funny, but Kid Rock's in it, so take with that what you will. Night of the Axe. Violent J really digs into his namesake here. There's a lot of sexist lyrics here that I'm not going to quote, but for research purposes, you can always look up the lyrics or listen on your own time. I don't really feel like I have to say trigger warning when I'm talking about ICP music, but if you're not a fan of their music and you think this would be a good starting point, I don't disagree, but I would question your judgment. It's definitely a song that thematically works on Carnival of Carnage, but doesn't fit with most of the rest of their discography unless you count it for being completely horrorcore. It's referenced much later on their Hell's Pit album in the song Night of the 44, which is a callback line, the Night of the Axe, the Night of the 44, on the song The Juggalo from this album. So you can, in that first song, he says the Night of the Axe, the Night of the 44. Then on this, he's got that song, The Night of the Axe, and it isn't until over a decade later that they do The Night of the 44. I wonder if the second song, that one, was thought of being placed on this album but wasn't implemented. The writing is way different on that one, so there's a good chance it was a concept and never actually got written until a decade later. But there's not much philosophical or spiritual about this song, Night of the Axe. Come to think of it, most of this album, is edgy and problematic, and it's hard to make justifications for why they've said a lot of this stuff. They also have a skit where they do a problematic impression of two guys at a Mexican restaurant in this song as part of the story as Jay takes his rampage to the restaurant. Given the context, it's likely they were trying to be edgy and funny rather than racist, but since I'm examining this with a critical leftist lens, I'm not going to ignore that it's a pretty bad stain on their career to have included it. This song and another, wow, I'm blanking, but I didn't write that here. This song and Blacken Your Eyes were not originally included on the definitive release of Carnival of Carnage, and I think for obvious reasons. But after many years, they re-released the album to include them both. Original store copies from '92 had the interlude from this song as the beginning of the next song, Psychopathic. So I'm going to use that as a segue into that song. The ghettos of America are breeding grounds for the criminal-minded, as for years they've killed one another off, and America has enjoyed its creation. But now these ghetto-minded criminals have crossed the line into your neighborhood and will soon give you a taste of the hell they have lived for so long. That's foreshadowing. So, Pops, this time it's your son who gets shot. Deal with your own creation. Now, again, we're looking at what they're saying and interpreting it in a modern leftist and critical context, okay? Like, problematic language throughout that. I understand that, reading it. But also knowing where they came from and seeing poverty and gang violence around them, they understood that the government could be doing more for people who live the way that they were living, and simply don't, right? There's not enough funding. There's not enough funding to get people properly housed, ensure that they keep that housing, have food on their table, have stable jobs, keep up with road and street repairs. There's so much that in cities, right? Cities are considered some of the most liberal havens ever, and there are sections of every city that are completely run down because they're ignored by white supremacist powers in place. Even though people will run on, we're going to clean up the streets and we're going to do this and that, the fact of the matter is that impoverished, usually majority black or non-white people of color neighborhoods are neglected by white government, and that's a sad fact. That's a sad fact. So their language here comes from two 19 or 20 something year old guys who don't have like a dialectical materialist understanding of that, but still understand shit's fucked up around me and I know it's the government's fault. So while their language in 1992, again, is problematic for the way that they framed it, I'm going to cut them slack on the presentation because I see the point that they're trying to make, and it can be reinterpreted in a positive way. If you were taking that out of context, it would sound a lot worse than it is. And again, I'm not really defending their use of the language so much as their access to better language, right? They didn't have it. They're high school dropouts. They're involved in gang life. this is what they saw, and this is how they tried to make that point, that they saw it. They saw the terror that was around them, and it's the fault of governments and rich people. And I say rich people, I mean people who are dodging taxes, right? People who are paying off your politicians to avoid having to take responsibility and avoid giving back to the communities that they serve. When I think of this, I think of the fact that Elon Musk has his fucking Twitter/X building on the edge of the Tenderloin here in San Francisco, which is one of the toughest areas of this city. And knowing that instead of figuring out a way in his quote-unquote genius to help, he just kind of spits at it, right? And, like, he looks at that as the reason why people avoid San Francisco, and that it's their fault that so many of them live on the streets the way that they do, and not the fact that, like, he can just get away with not paying taxes, and he doesn't feel like he should have to put in any more than he does to society, right? He wants to build his ridiculous underground tunnels and force people into these little tubes to drive Teslas in traffic jams as a vanity project, when he could be funding affordable housing or whatever else. You know, I'm not gonna go off on a tangent about Elon Musk. I might do a video about that in the future, but that's my whole point, right? The stuff that Violent J and Shaggy were writing about this is the point I'm trying to make here, that our government and the rich people in this world really don't care about poor people, and care even less about those who are so poor that they don't have housing. And Violent J and Shaggy saw that, and that's what they tried to get across, was that they deserve a better life living, you know, they're living on the streets. Those people deserve a better life, and people who have the means to do so should be helping to do something about it. That is an essence of Marxist thought, from each according to their ability, right? The rich and the government, to each according to their need. The people on the streets and the people who don't have secure food, water, housing, whatever. Violent J and Shaggy are not Marxists, but I'm saying this is the spin I can take from that line, is that they recognize that basic point. And I'm sure if I was able to sit down with them and talk about that, they would agree that that's the message that they are getting across, but they didn't have access to that kind of language at that time in their life. So, again, that intro, that interlude, really summarizes what the album represents. It's problematic and rough, but it speaks to the class consciousness I was talking about. With a more dialectic view, I can see this as the culmination of policies that took resources out of inner city areas and prioritized suburban communities where typically upper-class white folks live. The message to take from the Carnival of Carnage album, especially on songs like this, which are overly violent and otherwise hard to make a political case for, is that life is extremely difficult for poor and disenfranchised folks. And ICP was, in their simplistic way, advocating for some sort of revolutionary change. Unfortunately, in punching up, they hit other folks in the crossfire, usually women. This is going to be my biggest critique of their music. They, as people, have grown to be much less homophobic and sexist, but they're still not quite there. So I can appreciate the subculture they built, Juggalos, and the people who leaned into it for their own political awakening, but I'm not going to defend the sore thumbs that stick out. There are far better ways to make points about oppression under capitalism without hurting women and queer people in the process. ICP in 1992 didn't get this right. Black in Your Eyes. This song is purely misogynistic, but the kicker is that the chorus is an impression of a woman singing, "Tommy, son, take off your coat, I'll make you feel at home. Then take out my billy club and go upside your dome." The second time it's sung, she says, "Take that razor to your throat, I'm from the ghetto zone." So it's hard to say this song is against abuse when all but 2 lyrics in the whole song are so overtly advocating for hurting women. I'm not sure if that's the intent, but it feels like they added those lines as a tongue-in-cheek way of saying, see, we're supposed to be the bad guys. I get it, but it's going to fly over heads who aren't dissecting the lyrics like I would. Purely put, even if they had good intent, their impact is making that hard to look past. Because of this song and Night of the Axe, this album is a pretty difficult listen. It just is. It's really... I've listened to it a lot. There are things I attach to it, but I would never say it's anywhere near one of my favorite of their albums. It's just not. It's tough. It's really tough to listen to. Never Had It Made. Violent J has died and meets Saint Joseph at the pearly gates, but is rejected. So he spends his story talking about how he's been damned from birth. It's a pretty good song, and we could pull themes of Christianity's original sin, as well as the overarching theme of life in the ghetto being extremely difficult. Jay talks about how he ends up being addicted to crack and becomes unhoused, resorting to killing and eating people. He ends up in prison on 47 counts of first-degree murder. That's a skit in the middle of the song where he's in court and they say that. In the pen, he ends up getting abused and broken down. He tries to escape and is sentenced to death, exclaiming, "I got no family, I got no friends. I pray to God that my life ends." When he is shocked on the chair, he ends up coming back to life to haunt people who wronged him. This specific theme comes back on a song from Riddlebox, which we'll get to in a couple episodes. The undying nature of the wicked clown suggests that they can die temporarily and come back, either through will or spite. So I think that the character of Violent J in this song would have finally run out of lives, right? If he's made it to the pearly gates and is trying to appeal to get into heaven, that was like his last life. This song ends with a skit about a redneck who's about to do something awful to his own daughter. It rolls right into the next song, the best one on the whole album. Your Rebel Flag. And I only think they censored it because it's 1992 and it's really hard to sell an album where you use the F word in a title. This song was the loudest anti-racist song of ICP's entire discography for years. Fuck Your Rebel Flag. It's simple and repetitive chorus. The whole song is about murdering bigots. There's some misogyny in it still, and I'm not going to say that it's outweighed by the anti-racist nature of the lyrics, but I'll echo what I said earlier. Punching up is most effective when you're not hitting the wrong people on the way to the top. Ghetto Freak Show. Apparently, living in the ghetto has warped Jay and Shaggy into magical beings able to change shape. Jay has apparently shrunken down to a size able to sneak in through someone's ear, climbing through their body to murder them from the inside. That is some acid rap horrorcore if I ever heard any. More misogyny follows, though. Honestly, it's wrung out on just about every song on this album except the intro track, the eponymous Carnival of Carnage track, which is just a chorus song, and Guts on the Ceiling, because there's no other characters, really. It's Jay and his friends picking himself up. They use the F slur on this, too. I'm not going to justify its use, but Jay is talking about how a rich man would cut his own wrists if his grass wasn't green enough, which is evidenced by this hypothetical rich man finding out his son is gay. You can use your imagination for that if you're not going to listen to the song, but if you want the full context, at a minimum, maybe look up the lyrics. But again, don't traumatize yourself if that's something that would. But if you're listening to me talk about Insane Clown Posse, I really don't think that's the worst thing you're going to hear. Super problematic way to try to show solidarity with queer people. And I don't really think that was what they were doing either. It sounds like they had an attitude of like, I don't care if you're gay, but keep it over there sort of thing early on. That's probably true, right? Early 90s, two guys not very well educated, and I don't say that as a classist or ableist thing. It's just I'm looking at their material and the resources that they had available. They're not reading queer theory, they're not reading Marxism, they're not feminists. Like, this was it. This was their understanding of the world, and I'm going to give them credit for trying to make the right points, but I'm not going to defend it when they're going about it this way. Better language choices make all the difference, right? It's 2023, and that lyric makes me cringe. Shaggy dubs over this by making commentary about Violent J being admired as an attraction of the carnival, which is a simple metaphor for the pity fetishization upper class folks place on the poor and downtrodden, right? The idea that, like, oh, I feel so bad about poor people, but they're not really doing anything about it. They just want to make it seem like they care. Depending on your version of the album, either this song ends with, or the last song starts with, a final skit that summarizes the purpose of the Carnival of Carnage. Taste. Marching feet in unison sound off as Jump Steady recites, "The time has come for the blood to run in the streets paved with gold. We have lived in the zoo of the ghetto for so long, and like animals we have killed each other with a hatred for others. We must move into the suburbs and punish the rich for their ignorance and the horror of death that is a part of our life in our neighborhoods, and give them a taste of the same. And when we kill the government's children and the streets smell of death, maybe then we'll see our situation in a new light and put an end to the chaos of the ghetto and put an end to the killings." Again, I'm quoting this from that interlude, the skit. It's another problematic way to look at the violence around them, but also, again, understanding their limited education and resources to be able to make that point. They weren't spending time at the library when they were writing stuff like this, right? They were poor. They were spending their time gathering recycled bottles so that they could sell them to party stores for 5 cents. Like, that was their life. They would break into cars and steal things and whatever else, working if they could, but probably not, like getting whatever little money they had to record this album for the chance that it would blow up. And they did get a tour out of it, which, like, they wouldn't be successful if stuff like this didn't happen. But again, I'm looking at their situation, where they're at, where they're coming from, and talking about how it could have been worded better, right? We can't go back in time and change their minds. I'm not going to punish them for who they were 30 years ago, but I'm not going to defend it. I can't. I'm just pointing out that they had a simple understanding of the problems around them, and how I, as a leftist, can still find good things in it. Even though it's hard to listen to, I appreciate the fact that music like this, in my late teens and early 20s, was starting to shape my political understanding of the world away from more conservative views, and getting me to see that I didn't grow up in an inner city. I didn't live a gang life. I didn't have a lot of the same problems they had because I had a middle-class, privileged, suburban life at that point in my life, right? Like, that's how I grew up. So I can't relate to their problems, but I understand and I empathize because I have compassion and I have a better understanding of my place in the world and theirs in 1992. I understand logistically where they came from, and I can look at this with a critical mind and say, yeah, it's problematic, but they're making good points to people who have those words, right? This is the whole point of this series here, is that this is problematic language, but they're reaching people to whom that problematic language speaks, right? It's classist to think that you can just walk in, like, walk into the room where Violent J and Shaggy are and start quoting Marx and Kropotkin and Bakunin at them. They're not going to listen, right? You got to break it down simpler. Violent J understood that early on when he was trying to make that point, that he's speaking to people who speak the same language as him. When I look at this from that perspective, yeah, it sucks, right? They're using problematic descriptions of women and queer people and ghetto. Calling the ghetto a zoo is like super racist outside of that context. I know what they're saying, right? They're saying because they grew up in that, they feel like the government treats them as like a zoo, as actual animals. And yes, there is truth to that. But it really doesn't hit the same when you know it's coming from white guys saying that. So it's hard to talk about that, and I'm not going to justify its use. I'm just saying I understand how they got this language and where they were trying to go with it. But also, because they didn't have the terms like I would use to describe the socioeconomic conditions of Detroit in the 90s, you know? And I'm not a Detroit historian by any means, but because I have their context for it, and I have my context of self-education through political awakening over the last decade, I fucking get it. I know why they said the things that they did, and I also know why I would never use language like that to describe it myself. That's the whole point of this series. They were good guys who had a really tough and disgusting way at times of trying to get their point across of like people should live a better life. And they should be allowed to live a better life regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, background, creed, color, whatever. Like, they have that sort of language, but it's very simple, and it's coming from where they were at. And they used that, to reach people to whom that spoke. For someone like me who really needed 17 years old, that kind of language for me to understand where they were coming from, like that, it checked a lot of boxes for me, and it made me more sympathetic, and it made me really think about my place in white suburban middle class America in Pennsylvania in 2008, 2009, compared to Violent J and Shaggy, more specifically their real life counterparts, Joseph Bruce and Joey Utzler, growing up in gang culture, impoverished in Detroit in the late 80s and early 90s. Like, I will never experience that the way that they did, but I fucking understand, right? I understand where they're coming from, and that's why I can look at this and say, this is the point that they were trying to get across. I hope that helps. I really do, because I feel like I over-explained it. But this echoes the theme we've established since the intro track. It features this song, Taste. It features Nate the Mac, Jump Steady, Capital E, and Esham, all talking about having their horrorcore revolution to take out racists and rich folks, and the Detroit governor of that time period. There's a few lyrics about how poor and unhoused folks end up resorting to crime and drugs to deal with their hellish life, which is the direct result of racism, classism, capitalism. And again, they're not using that language, right? They're talking about racism, classism, and capitalism, but they're not really naming it that way. Racism more, right? Racism more for sure. The language all of these guys were using to describe these conditions is summed up under terms racism, classism, capitalism. They're not Marxists, right? I don't know about Capital E and Esham and all them, but the point is they're not fucking sitting down reading Marx and talking about dialectical materialist theory when they're writing songs about killing racists. They just recognize that there is a class divide, there is a race divide, there's a huge problem with the way the economy is structured, and they're using terms like this to say, like, yeah, kill the rich guy and fucking give us a chance because we're suffering. I get it. I totally get it. They're using that language, like I said earlier, the language they were limited to at that time, that they had at their disposal to reach people whose ears it could nest in, so those folks would listen and say, oh my gosh, I understand. At 17, you would not have been able to talk to me about dialectical materialist theory because I would have rejected it because I was conservative. But hearing these guys talk about how killing rich folks and governors apparently would solve the problems, it awakened at a minimum this spark of revolution in me. And I was like, holy fuck, like rich people really do have a better grip on society than I used to think that they did. And now at 32, 15 years later, I have a political mind that I can dissect this and say, well, yeah, it was problematic for them to describe it this way, but yeah, I understand why and how they got there. And I'm hoping other people who heard this kind of music had the same thought. And I've met people who I know did, right? But I know it's not everybody. There's that stereotype about juggalos all being white trash all the time. And unfortunately, that happens a lot, right? But it's a stereotype, so therefore it's not true of every single one, right? The reason I haven't gotten my tattoo covered up is because I'm proud of where I came from. Because I recognized early on that their music was going to shape the rest of my life. Even if I'm not their biggest fan and I don't listen to them all the time, I'm doing so now, obviously, because I'm exploring them as a series. But the point I'm trying to make is I don't regret the time that I have had listening to them, or I wouldn't be talking about them in the first place, right? Or I would be one of those people who just dismisses them. They're problematic, they're awful, they're not this perfect leftist thing, nobody should ever listen to them, fuck them, kick them away. No, I get it, right? They're liberal at best. They have progressive themes. They're philanthropists, which is sometimes good, but still problematic. I understand all of those things, and I also understand how people like me need that kind of language and need that kind of inspiration to see how someone can try to do it and how we can do it better by shifting further left and shifting into socialist views, right? Like, I wouldn't have called myself a socialist or an anarchist or anything like that 17, 18, 19 when I was starting to get into these guys. I didn't have that language. And if I did have language like that, it was marred by propaganda. Not understanding socialism and progressivism at 17 years old is a direct result of the way that I was raised and the family that I had around me and my socioeconomic, position in life. So I understand when they're coming at it from this, this angle, using that problematic language, they're reaching people like me and people in a lower economic class than I was in at the time. And those people are like, holy fuck, like racism and rich people are the problem and the government's not doing anything for the inner cities. And it gives you a better idea of the conditions of poverty, right? Like, so I get it. And I'm not going to ever defend the type of language they used, but I will defend the point that I know people like me have heard this, and as a result, we're able to move left and get out of conservative brainwashing. That's super important. That is so important when you're trying to build progress in society for people to get out of the boxes that they're stuffed into and think outside and say, yeah, it's violent, it's problematic, but what are the good things we can take out of it so that I can discard the rest and move on? If you've been following my other videos on YouTube, or if you're listening to this as a podcast, you'll know my biggest thing as a Satanist specifically, but as just my general direction in life, is to take what's good from whatever philosopher or philosophy, take the good stuff and then get rid of all the bad shit, because I'm not going to use that. That's problematic. I'm putting it away. I can't use that anymore. I've grown to a point where that is useless to me and it doesn't serve me to take with me. But this nugget right here, right, this class consciousness, this racism that's obvious, or the anti-racism, the anti-racism that's obvious in their lyrics. Even if it was simplistic and problematic in their delivery, it made a difference for someone like me. So I'm hoping other people who have heard this and have heard my material covering theirs have the same sort of idea about it. That's the whole point. So I take it back. This Taste is my favorite song on the album. It doesn't have a true chorus or refrain, but it hits really hard. I'll say this now, and I'll say it again, or similar in the future. ICP are high school dropouts, former gang members, and they accidentally started a spiritual political movement in their fan base. So many of us ended up becoming progressives and leftists, which means they successfully reached a demographic of people who might not otherwise have had access to alternative political views. That's the whole point of that sidebar I just made. I grew up in a pretty conservative home, and Juggalo culture was some of my first critical exposure to leftist ideas. Okay, I had bands like System of a Down and Flowbots in rotation too, but I wasn't as receptive to all of their messages in the same way as I was to ICP's delivery. I was an edgy, problematic young boy who needed some sort of outlet for my political anger, and ICP helped me explore that through their music, and eventually my own. If this review has taught you anything, it's that people really can change. Sometimes access to information isn't enough. It's how the information is accessed in the first place. I wouldn't be who or where I am today if I didn't encounter Juggalo culture. I'm not ashamed of that, and I will defend ICP out of both nostalgia and positive criticism. They can do better, but we all can. So on the next episode in this series, we'll explore Beverly Kills 50187 EP, as well as the Terror Wheel EP, and how it moves into the Ringmaster album. I plan on doing this exactly as it's presented, right? Talk about the album, talk about the songs on it, talk about what's good and what's bad, move on to the next one. In this case, there's 2 EPs between albums. I'm going to combine them both together and make that one episode, and then make the Ringmaster the next one. As we move forward in the series, I'm going to be doing that, right? Like, just, this is where they're at, this is what we're talking about, this is how I perceived it at 17 and how I perceive it now. And that's it, right? Like, that's the whole point of this series, is exploring a problematic band and problematic elements of their music, and not justifying its use as much as trying to come to an understanding of where they came from, what they were trying to get across, how I can apply what is good, and why the stuff that's bad is so far out of my reach that I don't touch on it anymore. I cannot use any of the sexism, right? I didn't quote it because it's terrible. This album was the hardest one to listen to out of all of their stuff, and I've listened to most of their material. Okay, like, maybe not in the last 6 or 7 years or so, but the point is, I've listened to so much of their stuff, and this album was really tough to listen to, and I was still able to get all of the good stuff that I talked about it, and hopefully make the listener understand where they were coming from and how I got where I'm at today to talk about it in a critical way. And I think that's pretty awesome, right? That's the whole point of my channel. Is to find stuff like this, right? Take the diamonds in the rough, essentially, and say, all of that other shit I'm not going to use, and that's okay. I do that as a Satanist. I do it as a socialist. I do it as a Juggalo. I like what I like, and I take what I need from it, and I'm like, okay, fuck that, right? I don't need this stuff over here. I'm going to take that stuff over there, and then I'm going to share it. Because the more I have access to material like this, right? Not just ICP, but I'm just going to use them because this is the series we're talking about. The more resources I have like this to talk to people who have a similar language, the easier I can reach them. That's the whole, in my opinion, the whole point of like reaching across the aisle and trying to talk to people about their political views, to bring them closer to an understanding of working class consciousness and the problems of capitalism. If I walk in, I wouldn't, right? But if I were to walk into like a conservative haven and try and talk to them about whatever it is I believe in, socialism and anarchism and all that other stuff, and use terms like that or demean those people for their beliefs, they're not getting closer to to where we can have an understanding. And I also know not all of them are going to argue in good faith, right? This is a whole tangent I don't want to go on, but I'll sum that up by saying there are conservatives who are actually conservative because they believe in the things that they say they do. Then there are conservatives who only care about the money that's paying them to care about them, right? Like, that happens with anti-gay laws. You find out that the person who's pushing for them is queer in some way. It happens with anti-abortion laws. Usually those politicians have needed abortions so they don't ruin their own image or career. Stuff like that happens all the time. So knowing that, I can't just walk into a place where a bunch of conservatives are and be like, I'm a fucking leftist and you should be too. I'm probably going to get killed because I'm a trans woman, right? If I don't, they're just going to call me slurs and push me out. I need to, if I'm going to have any sort of effect on meeting people where they're at, I need resources like this. If I'm talking to someone because I saw that they have an ICP shirt on and I find out that their views are kind of conservative, I'm going to ask them what they think about songs on this album to try and get a better understanding of where they're at in their political ideology and how I can bring them to a greater understanding. And I feel like that's a skill that leftists don't always know how to cultivate. A lot of us end up in these intellectual echo chambers where we just want to fight other leftists, right? You're not as left as me because I believe in fucking Lenin, or I believe in Stalin, or Kropotkin, or whatever. We're all nitpicking on the left who believes in what and why that's problematic for the revolution before we've even gotten there. We're either focusing on you wouldn't make it in the revolution because of this, or you wouldn't matter after the revolution because of that. And we're not thinking all of the time, and I don't want to speak for all leftists because that's, I know, cancel me or something. But it's so hard to reach other people if you don't meet them where they're at. And we can't grow class consciousness and awareness about the problems of racism, white supremacy, capitalism at large, the fucking cis heteronormative hegemony. We will not reach people if we sit in those sort of words and just yell at them or argue with people in Facebook comment sections about how you're a fucking idiot because you're conservative. Yeah, maybe that works for some people. It didn't work for me. I needed other people to drag me to the left and say, you're being problematic, you're saying the wrong thing, here's a source. And then I also needed other people who spoke like me or similar enough to bring me to a better understanding. If I didn't have people around me who had access enough to the type of language and understanding that I had of the world at 17, 18, 19 years old, I simply wouldn't be here today because I wouldn't have had those discussions, because I would have thought those people were too far, right? You're radical and you don't fucking get it. I was one of those anti-woman, feminazi, fucking incel types. I was in my early 20s. I'm not ashamed of that because I understand how I got there because of how I was raised and my socioeconomic position in the world. I get it. I'm ashamed of the way that I treated people, but I cannot be ashamed of the fact that I was there because it got me here. But I would not be here if I didn't talk to people who said, I recognize where you're having this problem and I want you to see it this way. And then they said, I recognize where you're having that problem and I want you to see it this way. And you can see by having these conversations, they're moving me further closer to the point. And now I'm where I'm at today. And am surrounded by people who think more like me, but we're challenging each other's views all the time too, because we're continuing to grow. And that's the essence. That is the whole essence of my idea of what my Satanism is like. It's why I even markedly call myself a Juggalo. Like, all of these things are because I understand, and I want to have conversations with people to get an understanding of where they're at. I don't want to say that I don't want to change minds. I'm not going out of my way to find people to talk to. There are tons of people who are better at talking to others than I am. I'm far better at talking at people, which is why I'm doing YouTube and I guess a podcast, basically. So all of that is to say, I want to analyze stuff like this, and I want to bring people who don't understand it closer to it so they can use it as a resource to talk to people who do, right? This is a different language. And people, I've had this problem talking about AA, right? When I'm in different recovery communities and I try and talk about AA terms and people don't like it. Or if I go back to AA and try to talk to them in terms I've gotten from elsewhere. Not everyone is receptive to all of those things. I need to know how to translate that language. I don't think of it as mental gymnastics because it doesn't tire me out. It just gives me a better understanding. I look at it as being bilingual in that way, right? I speak AA and I also speak Sober Faction, or I also speak Smart Recovery, or whatever. I speak leftist and I also speak Juggalo. Like, I have to look at it that way because that's what it is. So when I communicate people who have a similar language base as I have in whatever field it is that we're talking about, I can bring them to a closer understanding. That's the whole point. That is the whole point of what I'm doing with this series specifically. So if you like what I got to say, leave a comment below. Let me know. My last video on Juggalos got over 230 views at the time of recording, and right now it's Thursday, 8:30. So far, that's the largest view count on any of my videos. The second one was the first video I made about why I left TST. So if you like what I got to say, talk to me about it. Leave a comment. I want to know what your thoughts are. You know, like, how do you talk to people when you're trying to approach these points? Do you just brush them off because, fuck you, you're a Juggalo? Or maybe are you a Juggalo who moved into leftist thought because of this, right? Because of this type of conversation I'm trying to have about their music and about my journey through it and how I explored this. Let me know. Hit me up on Instagram, right? Follow me on Threads. I'm going to have those links below. Send me a Cash App or a Venmo or something. Like I said, I'm doing this for free. I enjoy doing it, but it's nice to feel appreciated, and it helps me keep some snacks in the cupboard. That's really all I'm asking for. Not much else to say, I guess. I'm going to continue doing this. Next week, we're posting another episode about Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book, so check back for that in that playlist. 2 weeks from now, we'll be exploring those other EPs, so I'm going to be listening to them a lot and doing a pretty similar format. I like the way this is going. I'm pretty hyped to continue doing it. Stick around. You know, it only gets better. Like, subscribe, follow, share with your friends. Start a discourse. Let's, seriously, let's talk about these things. Not just with me or at me. You know, I'm not saying just comment on my page and hope that we interact, but, talk to people about it. Not all my friends are into ICP. In fact, most of them hate ICP. But I can still have constructive conversations about their themes of their music with people who don't really like them because we grew together and we have the same sort of political philosophy. So I can take stuff from this video essay and I could go and talk to my friends on Discord or something about it, and they'll vibe with it. They totally will, and I love that. Tell me, are there people in your life that you can do this with? info dump, essentially. Use your autism powers to tell people about this awesome thing that you love that happens to be politically charged, even though it's problematic. I fucking love it. I really do. I love doing this. I'm going to keep doing it for the foreseeable future, and I'm glad y'all are listening. Till next time.